Start with contracting sprites. Chapter 306, Provincial Level, Preliminary Round. Time, February of a certain year. Location, Tianese Province, Tianese City, Suburban Base. Usually, the base was cold and cheerless, with only a few soldiers and sprite trainers around. Today, it was especially lively. Cars, pedestrians, sprite trainers riding sprites came and went. This was the location of the Supernova Cup, the preliminary round, and the Tianese Province Division. As the Supernova Cup was a world-class competition with many participants, it was obviously impossible to gather all the sprite trainers at once to hold a grand competition. That wasn't the goal anyway. The Supernova Cup will be carried out in stages. Overall, it is divided into 3 stages: the preliminary round, Dragon Nation's qualification, and the competition for the inheritance. Suhau, who had ridden over mountains and rivers on the dumb unicorn, heard the words by the side of the road. Turning around, he saw a young man with a stubble and a young girl in her 20s. At this moment, the little girl was asking with big, innocent eyes, "Master, Master, you must be aiming for the inheritance, right?" Cough, cough, cough. The young man put his hands behind his back and looked up at the sky. After a long while, he said, "You don't understand. How difficult is it to get the inheritance? I wouldn't be shocked if our Tianese province gets completely wiped out. Of course, as your outstanding master, I will definitely pass and get the qualification with outstanding battle results." The young man with the stubble lowered his voice and added, "Qualification of the preliminary, that is." He enjoyed the young lady's worshipful gaze. "You, on the other hand, shall stay in the audience and watch properly. Learn from your master or the tactics of others." There were many teams like the Stubbly Youth or teams of 3 to 5 people. Not all of them were participants. The Supernova Cup was also a competition that wasn't publicized or broadcasted live. But bringing a few family and friends to watch the battle and as emotional support was allowed. Lonely people like Suhau without company were actually part of the minority. "Well, someone like me is undoubtedly an expert. I have to observe more." At this point, there were only 2 days left until the official start of the competition. It was very lively around the registration point. But they were just spectators. Someone with a basic threshold of master level could beat over 99.9% of the sprite trainers here. Suhau waited for the young man with the stubble to finish registering before he stepped forward. He took out sprite trainer ID and personal ID from his pocket. The staff member at the registration point checked it, smiled, and handed the 2 documents back. "Sir, you meet the conditions for the Supernova Cup. Please fill in the relevant information on the form. In addition, this is your number plate. Please take good care of it. Someone will arrange accommodation for you later." Suhau looked at the black token in his hand. There was a red number 107 on it. "In that case, 106 contestants have already been registered before me. There are really quite a lot. There are still 2 days before the registration deadline. There are indeed many big bosses. I have to be cautious, cautious, and cautious." Just as he left the registration point and was about to head to the accommodation arranged by the Provincial Guild, he heard an angry roar behind him. "What did you say? I'm too old? It's clear my 30th birthday isn't until next month. Are you kidding me?" A bearded man with muscles and a slightly older appearance slapped the table, causing cracks to appear on it. The staff members who were just ordinary people were also shocked. The staff seemed to have also said something, but his voice was completely covered by the big voice of the bearded man. Suhau frowned. At this moment, a terrifying aura came from one of the buildings and shrouded the bearded man. His protective screen suddenly popped out, but he also froze. Especially when he saw his trump card, the extraordinary level mountain moving ape, looking like it was facing a great enemy. He calmed down immediately. A voice came from the building. The conditions for the Supernova Cup are written clearly. This isn't a place for you to cause trouble. If there's a next time, your Sprite trainer benefits will be cancelled. As soon as the person in the building finished speaking, the staff hurriedly took out a book and pushed it in front of the bearded man. The bearded man flipped it open. It was clearly written on it. 29 years old. Only Sprite trainers born after June were allowed to enter. 30 years old was just a general term. But, no one had informed him. The bearded man with muscles turned around and left like an aggrieved and resentful little wife. On the third day, the Tianese province-level competition officially began. It was just a provincial venue, there wasn't a big audience, but they still had an opening ceremony and speeches from the leaders. The Sprite trainers below the field and the audience didn't become impatient, because the person speaking was a Heavenly King level big boss. I didn't expect President Xia to host the provincial meeting. Heavenly King Xia is the president of our Tianese province. Isn't it normal for him to host the competition? What are you talking about? President Xia is a busy person. Not only does he have to oversee the development of the various new worlds, he also has to deal with organizations like the Dark Society. I heard that at the end of the year, a Dark Society Heavenly King sneaked into our Tianese province but was eventually chased away by President Xia. President Xia didn't want the Dark Society Heavenly King to take desperate measures. Otherwise, he would have directly captured that Heavenly King. Gasp! I didn't know that so many things had happened. Big boss, how did you know about all this? I'm no big boss. I work at the Countermeasure Bureau under the Provincial Guild. I'm just a small team leader. Ah, so you're the ultimate boss, you have my respect. Suhau was also looking at Heavenly King Xia, who was speaking on the stage. Suhau even had Heavenly King Xia Yang's contact information. He didn't get it during the college entrance examination. Instead, Suhau got it when he went to the Fire Sect dojo to visit the Dazed Crow, where he met Heavenly King Xia. After a while, he got familiar with him and got his contact details. It would make it easier for Suhau to garner favors in the future. Heavenly King Xia's speech only had 3 points. It ended very quickly. I hope all of you can show your abilities and bring honor to our Tianese province. The president finished his speech. The host picked up the microphone again and started to read out the rules of the preliminary round. The rules of the Supernova Cup provincial competition are very simple. There are only 2 rules, one is about individual battles and the other is about points battles. In individual battle, you command sprites to battle in a one-on-one way. During the battle, sprites can be replaced by other sprites through summoning. When all the sprites contracted by sprite trainers can't fight, and there are no sprites left to go on the battlefield, or if the trainer chooses to surrender, it will be considered as a defeat. Every contestant needs to fight 10 rounds. Winning gives you 3 points, a draw will get you 1 point, and losing will result in 0 points. Finally, the 10 contestants with the highest score will qualify and represent our Tianese province to compete in the Dragon Nation competition area. If there are contestants with the same score, another battle will be held. On the big screen, lots were being drawn. On the screen, many profile pictures and their corresponding numbers kept changing. In the end, it stopped changing and the results were fixed on the big screen. Suhau's eyes swept across and found his handsome profile picture. 107 vs 159. There was no name, only a number and a profile picture. The head of number 159 was a plain and ugly young man. Suhau didn't know the other person. Speaking of which, I don't think I know any of the contestants. Unlike others who hang out in the sprite trainer circles of Tianese province all year round. Those people more or less know more than 30 to 60 people. They were all upper middle class people in the circle. Many of them had even formed teams and traded with friends. They could greet or remember someone's name when they met. There were probably other related chat groups in the circle. But up till now, Suhau had only accepted one mission to explore the hall, and it was in another province. He still couldn't get into the circle. But there's nothing I can do. After all, I only know the big boss. Suhau's gaze landed on a certain part of the big screen. There was actually a photo on it that he actually knew. Chapter 307, No Worthy Opponents. The profile picture was of a girl. Just by looking at the photo, she gave off a cold aura. Suhau remembered that her name was Bing Ning. She was one of the strong opponents Suhau encountered during the combat practice of the 5 schools. Suhau had quite an impression of her. After all, Bing Ning almost got killed by him. But that girl, I don't recall hearing any news during the college entrance examination. How did she become a master? Apart from him, Feng Liangke and Yu Zhang were the top 3 candidates for the Tianese province college entrance examination. Suhau didn't know which school Yu Zhang, the young cute boy, had gone to, but he did know Feng Liangke. Feng Liangke was barely allowed to enter the special training camp last year. In terms of strength, he was inferior to Bai, and Bai's Polar Nine Tails was still struggling at the elite level limit. Indeed, everyone has their own fortuitous encounters. Who knows when a child of destiny who contracted a divine beast might appear? As an ordinary person, Suhau could only work diligently and steadily. The opening ceremony was in the morning, and the preliminary round started in the afternoon. The intelligence expert Lu wasn't around, and Suhau didn't know anyone else, so he had no way of getting information on his opponent, the plain and ugly young man 159. But there was no need. Suhau took a nap before arriving at Arena 3. At this point, one of the 2 parties fighting happened to be Bing Ning. The white seal back then had already evolved into Ice Emperor Tooth that was as big as a car, but not much development. He probably broke through to the extraordinary level within 2 months. Among the participants, Bing Ning's Ice Emperor Tooth was at the bottom level. But with the help of an exquisite secret manual and 3 sprites who were also pretty good at the elite level limit, she was able to win. When the judge announced the victory, Ice Emperor Tooth finally couldn't hold on anymore. Its body swayed and fell heavily to the ground. It was an evenly matched battle. Apart from the loser who was a little unwilling, the others all gave their applause. "It's you, Suhau." After sending the sprite for treatment, Bing Ning, who had just returned to the audience seats, suddenly paused. Her gaze landed on the familiar yet unfamiliar figure in front. "You became stronger again." Bing Ning's expression was complicated. She also took the college entrance examination, but she didn't enroll in any university. Instead, she returned to the Ice Element Dojo where she lived and cultivated continuously. With luck, the trump card Ice Emperor Tooth broke through to extraordinary level, and even had a chance of becoming a monarch in the future. She thought, "I should be able to surpass that person now, right?" But when she returned to modern society to search for information on Suhau, she was stunned to discover Suhau was already a master-level sprite trainer a few months ago. At that time, he already had 2 extraordinary sprites. She wondered how much he had improved since then. Not only did the distance not close, it even became further. The girl wanted to say something but stopped herself. Suhau looked at her and really wanted to say something to her. As a sprite trainer, the most important thing is to be happy. Think about how you'll be thrown further away in the future. Isn't it less sad now? But before he could say anything, the broadcast on the arena rang. "Next, number 107 and 159, please come as soon as possible." Suhau could only hurriedly say goodbye and jump down directly from the spectator stand 2 floors high. Bang! Suhau landed with both feet on the ground, as there was no need for him to roll and divert the force. He directly allowed the rebound force to spread from the tip of his feet to his whole body, feeling a little bit of soreness. He walked quickly to the side of the arena. At this moment, the ugly young man 159 opposite him had already arrived. "The battle begins." Contestants from both sides, please summon your sprites at the same time. The judge shouted. Suhau stood upright in the standard sprite commandeering posture. His right arm stretched forward, level with his chest, and his fingers spread open. Sprite commandeering, summon. Ding! Ding! At a pace that was neither fast nor slow, Suhau finished 2 degrees at the same time as the ugly young man opposite him. Instantly, ripples appeared in the space in front of both parties. Dazed Crow appeared. With a shake of its feathers, it let out a cry full of battle intent. Squawk! The sprite that appeared on the opposite side was a mountain-moving ape wearing a 3-piece earth element suit. It had strong muscles, shiny black hair, and bright eyes. But, seeing this, Dazed Crow lowered its head in disappointment. Was the crow looking down on its opponent? Well, after all, most masters only have one extraordinary sprite. It's unlikely that they'll have them go on directly. Squawk! Crow seemed to have understood. It had to kill the small monsters before it could fight the boss according to Big Sister. Squawk! Its wings tore through the air, emitting bright sparks. The first one sent out is an extraordinary ace. The ugly young man's expression became solemn. In the contract, he gave the mountain-moving ape an order to trade injuries for injuries. As long as it could cause enough damage to the flaming spirit crow, it could create an opportunity for his trump card to win. Its target was its wings. The mountain-moving ape had one arm in front and another behind, maintaining some kind of martial arts stance. Its legs were spread apart, and its fan-sized feet were planted on the ground. Its gaze was fixed on the flaming spirit crow 100 meters away. Suddenly, it disappeared. With extraordinary eyesight, it determined that the flaming spirit crow 100 meters away had suddenly turned into an afterimage. But just as this thought appeared, a red figure appeared in front of him. Its feathers stuck together piece by piece, forming a red shadow under its eyes. Pfft! The mountain-moving ape's fist had just begun to emit an earth-yellow glow when it quickly dimmed. A red line appeared on its left shoulder, extending straight to its right leg. The mountain-moving ape, which maintained its punching posture, fell heavily to the ground. At this moment, the flaming spiricrow's body had long swayed and returned to its original spot, as though it had never moved. This. What kind of speed is that? In the audience, many sprite trainers who were chatting had stunned looks on their faces. In just a moment of distraction, the battle ended. Even if an extraordinary fought an elite, it wouldn't be so one-sided, right? Even big bosses couldn't KO its enemy in one hit. His flaming spirit crow is indeed very strong. Bing Ning was the only one in the audience who expected the outcome long ago. After all, in the early years of the high school league, before the flaming spirit crow broke through, it had already been able to defeat some weak elite-level limit opponents instantly. At this moment, the ugly young man, who originally didn't have much confidence in himself, felt even more hopeless. Why did I have to be so unlucky to meet an expert in the first round? No, I have to change my strategy. He shouted in a low voice, Sprite commandeering, summon. A sandstorm giant scorpion about the size of a heavy truck with its tail raised, 2 stories tall, suddenly appeared on the field. The ground shook, and the giant scorpion stepped forward. Its tail kept shaking, its sharp stinger emitting a cold light. It was probably an extraordinary sprite. Dazed Crow became happy the moment it saw it, and enthusiastically greeted the giant scorpion opposite it. Let's have a hearty battle. Sandstorm giant scorpion. It didn't reply and instead raised sand. The yellow sand quickly covered the entire arena. The sandstorm giant scorpion with a yellowish-brown shell soon disappeared into the yellow sand. Sand rope. Sand blast. The plain and ugly youth gave the order. Immediately, the yellow sand danced around and gathered into ropes, covering Dazed Crow's feet and wings. At the same time, in the depths of the sandstorm, balls made of sand appeared around the giant scorpion. Each ball had the power to easily flatten a 3- or 4-story building. More than 10 sandstorms flew out with a whoosh, hitting the vague red shadow in the sand like cannonballs. Did it succeed? The agile flaming spirit crow isn't so easy to snatch with the sand rope. As long as I can buy a bit of time. The ugly young man was deep in thought. At this moment, 100 meters away from where he could see, red flames leaped up on the wings and feet of the dazed crow, burning the sand into ashes in an instant. Crow leaned forward, spread its wings, and flew out while sticking close to the ground. Red halos spread out all over its body. The extremely high temperature distorted the air, and the gravel that hit it was all crushed and burned up. In front of it, sandstorms containing a large amount of energy flew over. The dazed crow didn't dodge and continued to fly in a straight line at high speed, bumping into it head-on. Time seemed to have slowed down 1,000 times. Dazed crow, which was about to crash into the net, extended its wings with flaming feathers. The red blades on its wings were slender, and its flying body moved instantly. Whoosh! 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 Its body flipped 360 degrees in the air, and the flaming feather saber slashed continuously, accurately slashing onto every sand ball. It didn't slow down at all as it flew past the ball. The next moment. Boom! 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 The sand balls exploded one after another, bursting with countless gravel. The gravel continued to explode, exploding into fireworks that filled the sky. But they couldn't catch up to the flaming tail of the dazed crow. The dazed crow with double wing blades had already arrived in front of the sandstorm scorpion. It suddenly slashed. The scarlet blade light was bright and dazzling, piercing through the cover of the sandstorm. Swish! After a while, the sandstorm gradually dissipated. What appeared in front of the audience was a giant sandstorm scorpion covered in blade marks. And the unscathed flaming spirit crow. 13 consecutive, violent slashes in an instant nullifying the sandstorm giant scorpion's counterattack, slashing through its hard carapace, and directly defeating the sandstorm giant scorpion. Too strong. With just the flaming spirit crow, number 107 is qualified to qualify for the next round. A sprite trainer observing the battle clearly with the help of a sprite couldn't help but exclaim. He categorized Suhau as a strong enemy and prayed to avoid 107. At this moment, the plain and ugly young man had already given up. Only Flaming Spirit Crow was left on the field. It tilted its head and was in a daze. It turned around and asked Suhau, "Squawk." It was wondering why a huge, spicy scorpion was so weak. "Weren't we just warming up, Squawk?" During the preliminary rounds, one battle would be held in the morning and another in the afternoon. On the second and third days, Suhau went on the field with the same dazed crow. With just one sprite, he had been able to defeat 2, 3, and even 5 sprites in a single go. The reason why the contestant who sent out 2 sprites didn't send out more sprites was not because he didn't have more sprites, but he simply gave up after the second sprite was defeated. It made Dazed Crow very sad and puzzled. It didn't understand why these opponents were all so weak. This question. It all had to do with luck. Suhau couldn't figure out whether he had good or bad luck. Ordinary players would definitely hope that the weaker the opponent they matched, the better, but Dazed Crow hoped that the enemy was strong. The battle it wanted the most was to defeat the enemy with a weak advantage after 300 rounds of battle. For example, fighting with the big fat bear, who was Crow's favorite opponent. However, the bear wasn't interested in fighting with the crow. Instead, Crow went for next best thing, Dumb Unicorn. After a few battles, Dumb Unicorn, the winner of the battles, also started to refuse battling Crow. Dazed Crow didn't understand why. Didn't Dumb Unicorn win? Squawk! A long sigh came from the resting area. In the accommodation arranged by the provincial guild, at the spacious training ground under the courtyard. At this moment, there were two figures, one white and one black. Their colors were completely different, their auras were different, but their figures and looks were completely the same. Ihe and Fufu. Under the light and dark form, their respective battle patterns were developed. Sun Princess / Eternal Night Princess. It had fused a special clone-type unique skill and developed the secret manual of two-body unification. It could split into two bodies of light and darkness for a short period of time and maintain its peak state. Fufu, who was wearing a white dress, was surrounded by a warm halo. It stood there quietly, its hands folded in front of its abdomen. It called out softly, "Fufu." Ihe moved around more easily in a black Lolita suit. Its body hung in the air, and its feet swayed. Its head also shook. It seemed to have a Bluetooth earpiece stuffed in its ears. "Fufu." The white Fufu called out, sounding a little helpless. Suhau could tell at a glance. Ihe was being uncooperative. Immediately, Suhau used his special technique, Sprite Trainer's Gaze. Stare. At. The black figure immediately hid behind the testing device. Get. Out. Of. There. Ihe finally floated out, glancing at Suhau before lowering its head again. Finish today's mission. Otherwise, I'll make you fight, or get beaten. After Suhau finished speaking, he covered his forehead. This threat didn't seem to be very motivating for Ihe. Fufu, on the other hand, looked at Suhau pitifully, as if saying, "I don't want to fight, Fufu." Fortunately, Suhau was able to maintain his authority as a sprite trainer. The separated Fufu and Ihe stood together. Apart from the color, there was no difference between the two no matter how carefully one looked. At this moment, Fufu and Ihe flew up. The light and dark element energy on their bodies were constantly being entangled. When it reached the critical point, it happened to maintain a certain balance. The two merged again. It looked a little different. Behind it, there were black and white halos of all sizes. They looked like rings that were put together, emitting palpitating waves. The energy in the whole underground training room also became agitated. Strong wind swept across, only its body remained calm. At this moment, the Eternal Night Glory concubine on the interface showed that it was in the fusion state. At this point, its level had also gone from the limit of elite level to the initial level of extraordinary. The fused mode was extraordinary. It was the mysterious state that it could step into after fusing the two bodies. It wouldn't last very long in battle, much shorter than the dazed crow's sun stance, but under the fusion mode, not only did its energy level reach extraordinary, it could also sense the light and dark elements everywhere in the air. It was equivalent to experiencing the extraordinary realm. As long as FO completes the fusion mode once a day and comprehends the extraordinary, it won't be long before it can naturally step into the extraordinary level. Besides, every time it completes the fusion mode, the seemingly maxed out energy levels and other qualities are also improved visibly. However, all of this was limited to the Eternal Night Glory concubine. The same theory could not be applied on Butterfly or Ayan. The conditions for the birth of the Eternal Night Glory concubine had always been harsher than that of Butterfly Fairy. Suhau heard that there weren't many bright night spirit in the world at the moment. I clearly uploaded the paper. Why is it so difficult for other laboratories to evolve a bright night spirit? When it came to the academic paper, Suhau wrote that the bright night spirit needs to be tailored to the light-dark ratio and evolution time according to each ball of light. Once it fails, it may evolve into morning light spirit, twilight spirit, or something like that. Suhau could only publish the papers, and what others did with it was none of his business. In the 9th round of the preliminary round, Suhau's dazed crow finally met an opponent that made it excited. The opponent's profile picture showed that he was a young man with a stubble. Dazed Crow had heard from Dumb Unicorn that the young man with the stubble was confident that he would qualify for Dragon Nation. He must be a very strong opponent, right, Crow. With battle intent and excitement, the dazed Crow stepped onto the arena. On the opposite side was a cloud water dragon horse. Its strong body was filled with explosive power. Mist surrounded its body, which happened to be the water element that countered the flaming spirit crow. Number 107 is indeed using his flaming spirit crow again. Is he really so confident, or does he only have one sprite? The young man with the stubble was inclined towards his first guess. He didn't dare to be careless at all in the face of No 107's fire crow. If only I could get more information on number 107. But I don't know where this young sprite trainer came from. I asked around, but none of them actually know the name of No 107. But despite all that, the young man still had confidence. To put it bluntly, in the entire Heavenly South region, apart from the head of the Countermeasure Bureau and a few other people, he didn't care for any of the other master-level players. The dark horse that suddenly appeared was probably just a mediocre dark horse. He turned and saw his female disciple waving at him to cheer him on in the audience. She also made a gesture. "Watch how I, your master, take down my opponent." 106 vs 107, battle, begin. Water Dragon. The stubbly young man's command sounded almost at the same time as the announcement. The mist surrounding the cloud water dragon horse turned into a 10-meter-long water dragon. It didn't attack, but circled around the cloud water dragon horse as a defensive stance. The speed of the flaming spirit crow is very fast, so I can't compete against it head-on, so. Just like last time, the flaming spirit crow disappeared and instantly appeared in front of the cloud water dragon horse. The extended flaming feather saber slashed down. Slash! Splash! The flaming blade didn't cut the water dragon, but bounced off, blowing up water vapor all over the sky. Countless water spikes pierced out of the water-covered ground in an instant. The cloud water dragon horse also charged forward abruptly, bringing with it torrential waves. Instantly, the flaming spirit crow fell into a desperate situation. How is he going to deal with it? Bing Ning thought. If you use the same move too many times, you will be caught and end up in a dead end. Some of the audience members also said the same thing. The water spike approached, and the cloud water dragon horse came with the waves. The secret manual, Water Dragon, also lingered, opening its mouth to bite it. Dazed Crow sensed danger. Its rich experience told it that these killer moves could heavily injure it directly. Fiery red feathers appeared out of thin air around the stupid crow, covering its body like a coat. In an instant, the temperature rose sharply, the water evaporated in an instant, the constantly shrinking water spikes also shattered when it stabbed into the flaming feather gown. Dazed Crow had used 30% of its strength. It slashed apart the water dragon and slashed at the cloud water dragon horse. Boom! The wave of the cloud water dragon horse was broken, and Dazed Crow was also sent flying back by the impact, but it was basically uninjured. In the next moment, the red figure flew over, and before the cloud water dragon horse could react. With 2 slashes, the water dragon completely dissipated. With another slash, a bright red light broke through the water screen in front of the cloud water dragon horse and slashed down on its head. Slash! Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 5 slashes in a second. Screams came. When the smoke cloud dissipated, what appeared in front of everyone was only the collapsed cloud water dragon horse whose legs were still twitching unconsciously. How can this be? The stubby youth's palms were covered in sweat. After the cloud water dragon horse was taken away, he summoned a second sprite. Giant armored crab. It was the size of a car, with spikes as sharp as blades on its shell. An extraordinary giant armored crab. It had extraordinary power. But Dazed Crow seemed a little disappointed. As expected, neither the cloud water dragon horse nor the giant armored crab was worthy of being its opponent. Dazed Crow regretted having its hopes raised. It couldn't dawdle anymore. Big Sister had said before that if it played around with too many noobs, it might become a real noob itself. Dazed Crow thought for a moment, and then its gaze immediately became sharp. With a flap of its wings, it suddenly flew out. Halfway through its flight, a dazzling sun suddenly appeared on the field. With unparalleled power, it charged straight at the giant armored crab at one end. Boom! In an instant, the red sun erupted, and flames raged. Endless light and heat filled the entire arena, and many spectators' pupils shrank as they stood up abruptly. When the piercing light faded a little, the masters could see the hard ground caving in. The giant armored crab was completely charred black, its carapace had actually cracked, and its aura was very dispirited. With just one hit, it heavily injured the giant armored crab, which was good at defense, on the spot. The young man with the stubble was stunned on the spot. Breathing heavily, his fists were tightly clenched and covered in sweat. He tried twice before finally summoning his third sprite. It was also his last extraordinary. Armored Dragon Eagle. The moment the dragon hawk appeared, it flew high into the sky. He wanted to stall for time, but the dazzling and resplendent blazing sun chased after it at an even faster speed. Boom! Bright fire clouds erupted in the sky, and an armored dragon eagle that was charred black fell from the sky. It was another instant kill. And the blazing sun was still dazzling, emitting endless light and heat, as if the two slashes just now were only insignificant slashes. It shocked every sprite trainer present. This made the stubby young man who was confident a moment ago look bitter and hopeless. No 106 surrenders, 107 wins. The judge announced the results. The blazing sun slowly descended from the sky, the flames gradually retracted as the crow's flaming feathers returned to normal. It also put its wings away. Flaming Spirit Crow turned around and walked towards its sprite trainer step by step. Its back view seemed invincible and lonely. As expected. There wasn't a single sprite who was worthy of being its opponent. Chapter 308, the second stage of the competition. The whole provincial competition was very peaceful and dull. After defeating the young man with the stubble, Dazed Crow was even less interested in the remaining 10 opponents. At the moment the battle started, it would enter flaming feather form and use a normal slash to KO the extraordinary on the opposite side. It absolutely stunned a certain master level who wanted to circle around for a while before admitting defeat in a dignified manner. It was too difficult to be no 107's opponent. After the provincial competition ended, there was only one day of rest. The 10 people who qualified were led to Dragon City by a quasi-heavenly king expert from the provincial guild, to participate in the second stage of the competition. In late February, Tianese province's team arrived at a certain base in the suburbs of Dragon City. There's a world entrance here. Suhau turned his head and saw obvious crystallization on the trunk of some trees. It was a scene that only appeared at the intersection point under the influence of different laws. Zhuang Yan, the quasi-heavenly king leading the team, turned around and said, "This is the early entrance." In the past, there were some small troubles on the opposite side of the entrance, so it wasn't announced to the public. Now, the opposite side of the entrance is more like a training field. It's not a secret. If you want to know, you can find out for yourselves. With your level of authority, most of you can find out. Can I find out with only level 7 authorization? The one who spoke was the young man with the stubble. He made the cut with a result of 9 wins and 1 loss. No one dared to underestimate him. It was just that Suhau was too strong. There was a high chance that he could end up representing Dragon Nation and head to Europe to compete for the inheritance slot. He just wasn't sure how far he could go. Level 7, Zhuang Yan paused for a moment. You haven't done many missions over the years, and you haven't worked in the public service department, right? Commander Zhuang's eyes were filled with embarrassment. Fortunately, he was an ordinary master-level expert. But Commander Zhuang was still shocked to find out that he was only level 7. In fact, he had only advanced to level 7 2 months ago. The young man with the stubble smiled embarrassedly. I've been cultivating sprites all these years. Apart from the missions that I have to complete every year, I've rarely traveled anywhere. But after the Supernova Cup ends, I'll definitely enter a certain department. Besides, aren't we still young? We lack contributions, so our level of authorization is definitely going to be relatively low. Definitely. Commander Zhuang shook his head slightly. Suhau is younger than you, right? He's not even 20 years old, but he's already at level 9 authorization. His contributions to our Dragon Nation and the entire Union are even higher than mine. You don't believe me? President Xia told me. Besides, just the few papers published by Suhau are worth level 9 contribution points. The stubbly young man. Has Suhau been doing missions to accumulate contribution points since he was a baby? Suhau was only 20 years old. How did he accumulate contribution points that other masters couldn't even accumulate in decades? No, moreover, he had only become a master for a year or two, right? At this moment, I was wondering why the name Suhau sounded a little familiar. The sprite trainer who spoke, Mr. Chen, looked into the distance at Suhau, who was staring at a breeding area and observing. A look of realization appeared on his face. This name was once sensational last year. It was the person who discovered the solidification of mental strength. He's a very famous sprite cultivator. Is he the same Suhau? Masters like them naturally knew about the solidification of spiritual force. They just didn't pay attention to the author of the thesis. They didn't expect it to be standing right in front of the author. Hiss. The stubbly young man and the others had their hair standing up. Why don't you, a genius sprite cultivator, just focus on being a researcher? This question. Was it my fault for being so outstanding? With his back facing the crowd, who was secretly enjoying himself, Suhau shrugged. Almost all the best sprite trainers under the age of 30 in the whole of Dragon Nation, from various provinces, municipalities, special departments, had now arrived in Dragon City. At the moment, there were nearly 300 sprite trainers at the contestant village. It was a tense atmosphere. Of course, the ones who were nervous were only the contestants who weren't confident. Suhau still ate and drank. As usual, the trainers started to train their sprites. There was no nervousness or relaxation. According to Senior Wu and the others' estimates, I should have a 90% chance of qualifying right now, but among those under the age of 30 in Dragon Nation, it's hard to say where I'll rank. As for the evaluation method of the second stage of the competition, it hasn't been announced yet. If we're going to be matched randomly, I'll have to be on guard in case I encounter the most troublesome opponent. Ding dong. While Suhau was thinking, the doorbell rang. The door of the villa was pushed open. It was a slightly familiar face. It was the young man with the stubble. On the day of the battle, this man knelt quickly, but he also got up quickly. He was a person with strong resistance. One was from Tianese province. After a while, Suhau got a little familiar with him. He seemed to be called Qi. Suhau was still trying to recall his name when the young man with the stubble spoke. Commander Zhuang is calling for us. He seems to be talking about information related to the second stage of the competition. In a clean bar, a table was filled with alcohol. Commander Zhuang leaned against the back of his seat. When he saw that everyone was here, he said, "Listen up, I have news about the second stage of the competition model that you are all so concerned about. This year's assessment should be a team battle, an irregular team battle. Wasn't the previous team battle 3 vs 3, someone asked. There was a huge difference between team battles and irregular team battles. Team battle referred to commanding battles on the field according to the rules. Irregular team battles were more like a normal hostile encounter in the wild. Speaking of which, it was similar to the actual combat of the new college entrance examination. The competition model for each batch is different, Commander Zhuang said. Besides, for you guys, there shouldn't be any difference between battles and irregular battles. Although you are all young, I don't think any of you actually lack actual combat experience. In the end, it's still going to be the strength of your sprites that matters. He paused for a moment and continued, apart from the irregular team battle, the rest are pretty much the same. You only need to fight 2 to 3 rounds. At that time, an examiner will select the strongest 18 people according to your performance score and pick the people to head to Europe to compete for the inheritance spot. Those who don't qualify can also receive silver and bronze awards according to their performance. These are all substantial rewards. In addition, the results of the Supernova Cup can also be helpful for you to work in the various departments. Commander Zhuang also promised some benefits, in case anyone wanted to work at the Tianese Province Association. The gathering today was actually for him to rope in talents. This also made Suhau wonder which department he would work for after graduation. In the nation, there were various association of sprite trainers, association of sprite cultivators, as well as some other relatively small organizations. There were also various universities and war zones. The entire alliance consisted of the crime department, the exploration department, the battle department, the research department. These were the 4 main departments. The exploration department could help Suhau with collecting intelligence points. The battle department could allow Suhau to be affiliated to the Whale Island University's war zone. Research department. Suhau himself was already a sprite cultivator. He hadn't thought of where to go yet. After all, I'm still far from graduation. The next day, the host announced the rules and introduced the examiners. Heavenly King Chen from the Battle Department, titled Duanye. Heavenly King Gao from the Exploration Department, titled Lai Kong. Heavenly King Chong from the Arrest Department, titled Chi Mei. Heavenly King Gong from the Main Guild, titled Shan Hu. Suhau only knew one of the 4 big bosses. Heavenly King Gongling, who took them to collect their treasures back then, as for the other 3 heavenly kings. Before Suhau had time to observe, the 4 heavenly kings turned and left. They also quickly arrived on the opposite side, outside the city, in the vast wilderness. There was no registration information and no speeches from the leaders. The whole process was especially simple. In just a few minutes, the judge in charge announced the start of the 2nd stage of the assessment. Where's the arena? Even if there are no rules, there should at least be a battle area, right? Someone was puzzled. Suddenly. Rumble. The ground trembled. In front of them, the ground suddenly cracked, as if a pair of big hands pried open the ground. The cracks spread from the center of the crack to both sides and disappeared at the end of their vision. At this point, many sprite trainers rode their flying sprites and flew into the sky. Upon seeing this, Suhau looked at Dumb Unicorn and said, "Let's go up." Nay. Clouds and mist gathered into clouds near Dumb Unicorn and supported its feet. Instantly, Suhau's vision kept expanding. He had already flown up on a cloud. Real cloud leap. Compared to the horse form of clouds and mist, it was much more impressive. Big Fat Bear, which couldn't fly, was also on the white clouds. Why did its legs seem to be shaking? After reaching a height of several hundred meters, Suhau finally saw it clearly. On the ground, cracks spread continuously and finally closed, forming a huge circle, covering a large area of mountains and forests. A deep voice spread. Inside the circle is the battle area. Leaving or falling outside of the circle is the same as losing. The person who spoke was Heavenly King Duanye. He had created the barrier in an instant. At the same time, a huge stone pillar rose where Heavenly King Duanye was, lifting him up into the sky. The other 3 heavenly kings also used their own methods. Heavenly King Gongling sat on a water ball. Heavenly King Lai Kong's robe puffed up as he flew up into the sky without anything. Heavenly King Chi Mei was a cold-faced middle-aged man. He sat on a black coffin, dark light lingering around his body. The four heavenly kings stood high in the sky, looking down at the arena. The host picked up the microphone and announced, "Now, as for the participants. Chapter 309, Talent from Everywhere, Suhau makes an appearance." In the second stage of the competition, there were more than 200 master-level sprite trainers, all of which were capable of getting into the sky. At this moment, they all flew up and scattered in the sky, outside the abyss at the boundary of the arena. On the ground, towards the direction of the city, a few mountain-moving apes carried equipment over. On the huge display screen, human heads flashed. After a few seconds, they stopped. Two backgrounds, one red and one blue, appeared. They were separated diagonally. On the red and blue background were two pictures of two contestants cut off at the waistline. The sprite trainers high in the sky could see it clearly just by relying on their own eyesight. Those who couldn't see clearly, also had methods such as sprite commandeering, visual sharing. They weren't going to fly down to take a closer look as that would be embarrassing. They were contestants, but they were also prominent figures in their respective territories. The first one seems to be Fiery Bird University's instructor, Xiang Zhenxin. The second person. I don't know him. Oh, right, it's Huang Laiwan from the Huang family of sprite trainers. I heard that he's only 25 years old. He's gotten quite far for his age. 25 years old, someone shook his head. 25 years old is nothing. There are people here today who aren't even 20. Suhau, a second-year student of Whale Island University, is less than 20 years old. What the? But he's still not the youngest. A sprite trainer dressed in white who was good at collecting intelligence, stalled for a bit before slowly saying, "The youngest is Lan Qing, a second-year student from Dragon City University. Although she's also a second-year student, her actual age, according to my understanding, is under 18. Gasp, this is truly a world of geniuses. The young man in white continued, "Of course. After all, we are competing with all the sprite trainers in the world for the sprite trainer inheritance slot. Youngness can only represent potential, it's their strength that really matters." Suhau heard a familiar name. He also found the young man in white who was speaking a little familiar. He remembered that he had met him before during his trip to Ghost City. He looks a little similar to Mr. Bai. I think his surname is also Bai. You're talking about the one in white. The young man with the stubble who was riding an armored dragon hawk and flying at the side looked not far away and said, "He's from the sprite trainer Bai family, and very likely the next family head." Family head. The family head is not only the head of a family, but he also controls some unique family resources. With the size of the sprite trainer Bai family, as long as Bai Xiaoming becomes the family head, he will definitely break through to the heavenly king tier. At this point, two sprite trainers, Xiang Zhenxin and Huang Laiwan, entered the arena from both sides. They hid themselves and moved through the forest. Before long, the battle erupted. Bang! Rumble! Giant waves sent trees flying, the ground cracked, soil and rocks flew, thick smoke and dust filled the air, covering everything. Whether they could pass through the smoke and dust to observe the battle situation would depend on their respective methods. On the other hand, the young man with the stubble was struggling to find out what was happening. "Damn it, I can't see anything. It's good that I can fly closer." There was a faint light reflected in his eyes. Clearly, he was using visual sharing, but although the armored dragon hawk's vision was strong, it couldn't see through. Besides, it was very far away and he also couldn't get too close. Suhau could only console him. "Don't worry, both of them are weaker than you." The young man with the stubble. He didn't feel comforted at all, just even more sad. "Why don't I help you broadcast the battle situation?" The young man with the stubble. "I'm trying to do you a favor." What a strange guy. Suhau continued to watch the broadcast. In his mind, an illusionary scene unfolded like a water screen. In the smoke and dust, a stone giant roared while a tyrant bear raised a sandstorm. Tide-calling spring Sprite stood in the vortex, the light of the clear jade lotus shrouded the Sprite trainer. It was an image he collected with Butterfly's observation device. Their abilities seemed to be similar. One of them was beating another person. But there was no clear winner even after 3 minutes, and both sides suffered damage. In Suhau's opinion, they were similar in strength. If it was Suhau fighting the battle, Dazed Crow can kill either side in 30 seconds. After all, both of them are better than. He glanced at the person next to him. They were both weaker than the young man with the stubble. Then, it must have been deliberately arranged. After all, if the difference in strength was too big, there would be no opportunity for the weak to showcase their abilities. The stronger party would also not be able to unleash their full potential. In the battle with the stubbly youth, the Dazed Crow had only used 70% of its strength. After the battle, the 2 master-level Sprite trainers left, leaving behind a damaged battlefield. Soon, the next battle began. The second round. The third round. The fourth round. After many rounds. The arena was limited, after all. Every round of battle only lasted 3 to 5 minutes. In a day, more than 200 people would be able to complete their first round of the battle. During this period, Suhau had been using the Butterfly's battlefield observation device. Butterfly's vast spiritual force covered the battlefield, its furry antennae received the signal, and then it used its illusion attainments to turn the signals into an image. It was like a crude TV. However, it was still far from being able to create perfect, realistic images. Gurgle. Are you looking down on my abilities? Gurgle. Not important. After fighting one battle after another, it seemed Suhau's estimation was more or less correct. The contestants were random paired with opponents on the same level. But there were also exceptions. It's the Sword God. Bai Xiaoming said. He comes from a very special sect, first-rate in human and spiritual integration. And the Sword God is the best of the younger generation of this sect, famous for his swordsmanship. I've long known that he's very strong, but I didn't expect him to be so strong. The opponent of the Sword God was a Sprite trainer with a mature appearance, much stronger than the young man with a stubble. His team battle system was very mature. The cultivation level of Sprites was also extraordinary high level, which was very close to being the best among the contestants in the Supernova Cup. Boom! A slash cut through the mountain. A resplendent golden sword beam cut through the layers of mountain rocks, slashing across the body of a huge mountain beast that was 5 to 6 stories tall despite its outstanding cultivation and strong defense. Instantly, the golden sword mark pierced through the mountain giant beast and emerged again from its back. The mountain giant beast let out a sad cry and fell heavily to the ground. The figure holding the long sword swayed and appeared hundreds of meters away. Swordmaster. It was the name of a sprite. The sword servant in its initial form was just a sword. The final evolved form, Swordmaster, was a shadow holding a long sword. There were 3 sword-shaped shadows behind it, pointing inward. At this moment, the shadow of the Swordmaster shrouded the man named Sword God. He held the golden long sword in his hand with a cold expression. An invisible sword aura was released, and everywhere it passed, just the aura alone severed mountain rocks and plants. He only had one sprite, Swordmaster, but still managed to dominate the whole battlefield as he had masterful control over his sword. In just less than a minute, golden sword beams crisscrossed as powerful extraordinary level sprites fell with a boom. The judge announced the results. Domination. Too strong. The young man with the stubble was dumbfounded. Bai Xiaoming also concluded, he will definitely be able to qualify. Moreover, there's a high chance that he will be able to get a spot for the inheritance. The battle continued. During this period, Zhu Dong, Yang Diu, and Gu Feiyang, who had hopes of qualifying for Whale Island University, also took the stage one after another. 2 wins and 1 loss. Instructor Zhu King lost to a descendant of a sect. But it didn't mean that he had no hope of qualifying. Both of their abilities were high among the people who went on stage. The differences could be easily determined from battle power and aura. Among the 200-odd people, the difference between strong and weak was very obvious. But the abilities of Instructor Zhu and Instructor Yang Daihu are still rather uncertain. At this point in the battle, apart from the Sword God and a few others who possessed overwhelming strength, there were also some who were in between qualifying and not qualifying. The fate of these contestants were on the hands of the several heavenly kings and big bosses. Or they could go through a few extra battles. Apart from the instructors of Whale Island University, unexpectedly, Suhau actually saw another person who looked slightly familiar. It was a person with red hair, riding a flaming godhound into the arena. It's the arrest officer Xia. Not far away, Bai Xiaoming's voice came again. In the Crimer Bureau, many sprite trainers address each other by code names. The level of information confidentiality is very high. I only heard that Xia seems to be the daughter of a certain heavenly king, and her abilities are pretty good. At this moment, in the arena, the flaming godhound roared. A cinder dragon with wingspan of 7 to 8 meters circled in the sky as it spat down large amounts of flames. Cinder dragon, flaming divine hound, crimson flame 9 tails. There were only 3 extraordinary ones on the stage, but they were a fierce batch. Flames rushed into the sky, illuminating the whole sky. It only took a minute and a half before the opponent was forced to admit defeat. Another person who's definitely going to qualify. K was in the top 30 among us, but even he couldn't last long. The arrest officer, Xia, won easily. After a few rounds, as expected, another slightly familiar person appeared. Xia's partner, Lin. Back then, I didn't seem to see how strong they were either. It was mainly because they had arrived late that day, and the arrest team that was defeated by Black Spade K was very weak. Suhau didn't expect that they would also be at the top level in the second stage of the Supernova Cup. Xia's strength is about the same as Instructor Gu. Lin is slightly weaker, but both of them are younger than Instructor Gu. Of course, compared to Suhau, they were all older girls. Lame. Lin's sprites all more or less leaned towards the support and healing type. There was the miraculous physician, the apothecary rabbit, and the clear jade lotus. Apart from the clear jade lotus, the other 2 were rare sprites. The apothecary rabbit was an upright human-shaped rabbit. It held a wooden staff in its hand, and a gourd hung on its staff. At this moment, the gourd flew up high and hung in mid-air, emitting waves of brilliance, maintaining the clear jade lotus at its peak state at all times. The miraculous physician was also in human form. Its white clothes fluttered in the wind, and it held a silver needle in her hand. It was a healing type, but its destructive power wasn't weak. With a flick of its white fingers, silver needles flew out. Instantly, thousands of needles rained down, falling like a rainstorm. It had good defense and could heal very quickly. Even though the time taken for Lin to win was slightly longer, it was still a steady and stable fight, and she defeated the enemy with an obvious advantage. When the 2 of them form a team, the power they can unleash is indeed very scary. As time passed, it was already afternoon. The battles became more and more exciting as it approached the end. Inside the arena, the ground shook, lava flowed, and waves were raised. The battle environment of the next round was completely determined by what had happened in the previous round. The arrest department, the exploration department, the command department. He discovered that many top-level sprite trainers came from these departments. There were also descendants of sects and young masters of clans. Aside from the trainers from high school, the people from the Association of Sprite Trainers everywhere were also pretty strong. As for unaffiliated sprite trainers, those who could reach the second stage of the selection were already doing pretty well. Next, Lan Qing against Sikong Yu, the judge shouted. Lan Qing sat on the storm godhound and rushed into the arena. The battle erupted in an instant, and the wind domain enveloped them. Almost instantly, the aura of the storm god hound, mist feather swallow, wind giant spirit, flying python. The auras of the wind element sprites increased exponentially, sweeping up a strong wind like blades, and the brilliant heavenly might pushed forward. Whether it was fire, water, lightning, none of them could withstand the grey storm. Layers and layers of the land were scraped off. Her opponent used various methods to resist and counterattack, but was quickly suppressed. In just dozens of seconds, Lanqing won in a crushing manner. The terrifying heavenly might made everyone continue to be flabbergasted. She's only 18. The young man with the stubble had originally thought that he would have a chance at seizing the qualifying rights of Dragon Nation. Now that he saw the others, he finally understood that the others were all monsters. Monsters younger than him. The flaming spirit crow that had completely tortured him was very strong, right? But the storm in front of him was almost like a natural disaster, it was even more terrifying. The stubbly young man's confidence was almost destroyed. At this point, the judge's voice sounded again. Next, Suhau battle. Chapter 310, The Power of Thunder Rain, Terrifying Heavenly Might. Next, Suhau vs Ning Mao. Both parties, please enter. In the distance, hundreds of meters away, a sprite trainer riding a giant sandstorm eagle flew towards one end of the battlefield. Standing on the cloud, Suhau, whose clothes were fluttering, also slowly lowered his height. Ning Mao is the successor of the Sandstorm, he's a little similar to the girls in the previous round. They're all good at using the power of heaven, you have to be careful. The young man with the stubble said. Suhau thanked him and soon landed at one end of the arena. As far as the eye could see, there were no longer any mountains or trees in the arena. The whole land was caved in, and there were traces of scorching and freezing on the ground in some places. But most of them were ravines all over the ground. Countless huge scratches crisscrossed and crisscrossed like a blade, slashing countless pieces of the ground. It was a ghastly sight. It was the scene left behind after Lanqing's fury of storm. For the time being, it could be called the Mound Grounds. Under the rocky cliff, Suhau, who was standing on the ground, could no longer be seen. On the opposite side, Ning Mao was also nowhere to be seen. The two parties were 2 to 3 kilometers apart. But Butterfly could sense the danger. Get ready! The dazed crow flapped its wings and flew into the sky. Butterfly was still lying on top of Suhau's head. Ayan was still hiding in the shadow. Fu, in a white dress, stood quietly behind Suhau. Dumb Unicorn stepped on its hooves. Big Fat Bear seemed to be shaking a little. A group of sprites was ready to attack. At this moment, in the sky, everyone was watching. Someone looked at Bai Xiaoming. Brother Bai, who do you think will win? Bai Xiaoming thought about it and said, Suhau. I don't think so. Isn't he only 20 years old? In comparison, Ning Mao is a core disciple of the Sandstorm dojo ever since 7 years ago. Now, he's already internally designated as a successor. I've seen videos of him fighting. He's very fierce. Lanqing, who won the previous round, isn't even 18 yet, Bai Xiaoming said. Another person from the spectating crowd questioned, in fact, the level of cultivation of Lanqing's sprite isn't high. The strength lies in her wind domain. Compared to them, Suhau is just an ordinary person. You don't understand. Bai Xiaoming recalled Suhau's performance during the challenge in Ghost City. It was amazing. Of course, Ning Mao is an opponent that can't be underestimated. She also has hope of qualifying. This battle should be very exciting. He looked down. At this moment, the battle had already begun. Yellow-brown sand and dust appeared in the distance, growing and swallowing everything in its path like a terrifying giant beast. Sandstorms are not simple sandstorms. They have the characteristic of swallowing everything and constantly growing. I wonder how he's going to deal with them. With the help of visual sharing and the dazed crow flying high in the sky, Suhau had already seen the yellow-brown sandstorm coming from afar. The gravel was very dense and was nothing like the sand that could only block one's vision. Dazed crow grabbed a huge rock and threw it towards the sandstorm. The moment the huge rock came into contact with the sandstorm, it shattered and turned into powder. The terrifying sandstorm, even if Dazed Crow used flaming feather form, it wouldn't be able to last long against the sandstorm. Sun form will be able to hold it off, but the consumption will definitely be high. Besides, the sandstorm was only the tactical core. Suhau didn't expect his opponent to only rely on the sandstorm. Dazed Crow's decapitation tactic was inappropriate, so he eliminated it first. He opened the interface and took a look. On the opposite side are Sandstorm Giant Eagle, Sandstorm Giant Scorpion, Tyrant Bear, and Sand Earthworm. They are all sprites that can control sandstorms and exert 200% of their battle power. If you want to defeat your opponent, you have to attack its shortcomings. He thought of several plans. 1. Yan Stealing Tower Tactics. A Yan's shadow traversal didn't care whether you were a sandstorm or not. It could also carry people. It could bring the whole team and directly locate Ning Mao. 2. Butterfly's Illusion Dominance Tactic. The operation was simple. Cause the enemy to feel pain. 3. Eternal Night Glory Concubine's Star Explosion Tactic. 4. Defensive Counterattack Tactics. In other words, head-on confrontations, lures, defeating them one by one. So, I choose Tactic 5. I'll use Heavenly Might to fight Heavenly Might. I'll leave it to the two of you. He looked at Dumb Unicorn and Big Fat Bear. No problem, right? Nay. Dumb Unicorn stood up and stretched out its hoof, as if it wanted to strike a pose. Big Fat Bear put on its armor and finally stopped shaking. It also roared, howl! Howl! In just a few seconds, the yellow-brown sandstorm rolled over and came into sight. It was like a huge wall 100 meters tall, pushing forward. Before long, it would envelop Suhau. But at the same time, it was dark. Water vapor gathered into clouds. At some point, the sky was already filled with dark clouds. In just a moment, a downpour poured down. Rain instantly flowed down the dry field. The dense raindrops hit the sandstorm. Will the heavy rain be able to stop the sandstorm? This won't do. Although it accumulates power very quickly and can forcefully create a rain screen in a dry environment. At the end of the day, it's still just ordinary rain, and the sandstorm isn't made of ordinary sand. As expected, under the pouring rain, the forward momentum of the sandstorm slowed down a little, but it still moved forward with boundless power. On closer inspection, the fine gravel in the sand wasn't affected. Outside the sandstorm was pouring rain, but inside the sandstorm, it was still very dry. Howl! In the pouring rain, facing the sandstorm, Big Fat Bear opened its arms and roared. Bear's roar. In an instant, there was a big flash of lightning. Countless thunder arcs burst out of its body. With the help of the water's conductivity, it spread rapidly in the surroundings, and under the control of its level 3 thunder element, the thunder arcs charged straight into the sky. Raging thunder. The infusion of thunder made the whole sky even darker. In the darkness, there was the light of thunder arcs, constantly flashing, and the rain became denser. In a few seconds, lightning fell from the clouds. Lightning fell one after another, hitting the ground and the sandstorm. Thunder and gravel constantly collided, destroying each other. Sandstorm had heaven's might. Lightning rain had even more heavenly might. With water and thunder as the center, dark clouds shrouded and gradually spread out. By now, the dark clouds had shrouded areas outside the arena. The spectating sprite trainers could only see thunder arcs jumping. Under the glorious heavenly might, many eyelids started twitching. Watching the battle seemed to be just as dangerous. The 4 heavenly king-level big bosses were also shrouded in dark clouds. From time to time, lightning would fall. They were naturally very calm. The energy of lightning and water actually fused almost perfectly without much loss of quality. Interesting, said the Heavenly King of Space Splitting. Under the power of the thunderstorm, the sandstorm has already been restricted to the maximum extent. It can't even cover the whole arena. Next, will they compete in terms of consumption, or change tactics and attack? Heavenly King Gongling also smiled. At this moment, half of the battlefield was filled with sandstorms and the other half was thunderstorms. The terrifying heavenly might split the whole battlefield into two. The battle had only started for 10 seconds, but it was already at its peak. Peak? Big Fat Bear wrapped its arms around itself and curled itself into a ball. Blinding blue-purple lightning blossomed on its fleshy but armored body. From time to time, thunderbolts would fall on its body. As if being guided by the thunderbolts, Big Fat Bear also flew into the sky. At the same time, the dark clouds rolled and formed a vortex. The thunder ball shot in, and immediately, boom! Boom! Endless lightning spread, covering the sky like a huge net. In the thundercloud vortex, a huge figure emerged. Lion head, antlers, dragon scales, horse hooves. On the body formed by endless water streams, lightning wrapped around it. In one of the huge beast's hooves, there was even a huge lightning ball. It was Meatball, Big Fat Bear. The appearance of the giant beast seemed to be slow, but in fact, in just an instant, everyone only saw the thunder ball flying up, the thunder rain suddenly erupted, and the figure of the giant beast was revealed. With a hoof, it pressed down. It carried endless heavenly might. Boom! The world seemed to tremble. Terrifying aftershock spread out from where the huge beast's hoof landed, like a sandstorm on a huge wall. In an instant, a huge hole exploded, and countless gravel scattered in all directions. The sandstorm that made people feel despair mostly dissipated under the hooves of the huge beast. In the center of the hole, the pupils of Sprite trainer Ning Mao and his Sprite contracted. Not good. Sand gathered and turned into a ball-shaped shield in front of it. Countless sand spears and sand blast balls appeared around them and blasted at the huge beast. But roar! A terrifying sound that sounded like angry roars and thunderclaps echoed in the world. Under the suppression of the hoof, both the sand spear and the sand blast ball exploded. The huge hoof, wrapped in lightning, smashed down without any reduction in momentum. Countless thunderbolts in the sky were also drawn to the dazzling thunder ball at the front of the hoof. Piercing thunder rumbled as countless thunder arcs were sent flying. The huge beast's terrifying body also leaned forward. Boom! The sky was filled with blue and purple. Rumbling sounds echoed in everyone's ears. The trembling of the ground didn't stop for even a moment. The ravine split open and expanded continuously. The arena was like a large ship swaying in a thunderstorm, as if it was going to break apart and sink directly. Only Suhau stepped on the sky-blue clouds. Fu, who was behind him, took out an umbrella from a Yan's pocket and opened it. Rain poured down, the earth rumbled, but Suhau was not affected at all. Suhau gazed into the distance as he remained calm. Rain and sandstorms, thunder and dust. The result was clear.